Hey y'all, welcome back to Dots and Beyond. My name is Beth, and this month is brought to you by Silly Mistakes and Regret. For this Oktoberfest theme, I have this earthy color palette with the gold and red of Germany's flag and some brown and green to evoke fall vibes. And it should come as no surprise that I also have some stencils ready at hand. I'll be using this stencil for the headers throughout the setup, and of course I go ahead and make a mistake right off the bat. So if you see it, go ahead and leave a comment down below with the proper spelling of Oktoberfest. I do catch this in the long run. You won't see the corrected version until the flip through, but I do come along and realize that I am missing an F there in Oktoberfest. Now what I decided to do was make this cover page a pair of lederhosen, and so that is what I am drawing here on the right, along with some wheat and some beer and a sausage and just some other things that evoke sort of those Oktoberfest vibes. For most of the line work in this setup, I am using a 0.05 Pigma Micron. Y'all know this used to be my go-to pen, but it's still my go-to pen when it comes to sketching things out. For the teeny tiny numbers, I do switch to a 0.02 just so I can get those fit into the little boxes a little more neatly. While I add some color to the spread, let's learn a little bit more about Oktoberfest. Oktoberfest is the world's largest folk festival according to Oktoberfest.de. With origins dating back to the 1810 wedding celebrations of Prince Regent Ludwig of Bavaria and Princess Theresa of Saxony-Hildburghausen, which I probably butchered. Oktoberfest started as a horse race, but Bavaria has had more than 200 years to perfect its festivities. Not that it hasn't been derailed by a conflict from time to time, like the Napoleonic Wars and both World Wars I and II. A bombing in 1980 killed 13 festival goers and the bomber, but Oktoberfest persists. In 1819, after the Napoleonic Wars, Oktoberfest was made a priority, even in the uppermost circles. The news had arrived that the Oktoberfest was guaranteed to draw a crowd and that it would generate a wealth of revenue and should therefore be celebrated annually. Remember that moment of regret I mentioned? This is it. I am digging out my scraps box to get a piece of dotted scrap paper because I colored this piece of wheat stem green, and I really wanted some green on the page. I thought I could get away with coloring this green instead of its customary yellowish wheat color, but the regret was absolutely instantaneous. And so here we are going to do some surgery so that I can fix this piece that is colored already right in the middle of my page and redraw it. Here I am just doing some measuring and figuring out what angle of a curve I need to cut so that I don't have to also redraw my glass of beer. And it just takes a little doing, some nudging, some sketching to figure out what this patch piece is going to look like so that I can then redraw that wheat stem. This page just shows that sometimes we make multiple mistakes on a single page, and they're not often a quick fix. Sometimes you can slap a piece of sticker paper on it or just a little bitty piece of dot grid paper, and then other times, like this particular time, in order to not redraw huge chunks of my drawing, I'm having to do a little bit of creative surgery before I can come back in and resketch that wheat. While I continue patching up this mistake, here's a little more information on how Oktoberfest has grown over the years. In 1887, the parade of the Oktoberfest staff and breweries took place for the first time. This event showcases the splendidly decorated horse teams of the breweries and the bands that play in the festival tents. This event always takes place on the first Saturday of the Oktoberfest and serves as the official prelude to the Oktoberfest celebration. In 1950, Mayor of Munich Thomas Wimmer tapped the first keg in the Schottenheimel tent for the first time. Ever since, it has been customary for the mayor to kick off Oktoberfest. The city of Munich spends weeks prepping for Oktoberfest. Some of the largest beer tents alone take 6 to 8 weeks to erect, and attendance in the last few years has topped 6 million. To preserve the traditional beer tent atmosphere, officials adopted Quiet Oktoberfest in 2005, limiting the music in the tents to brass or traditional folk music until 6 p.m. While the beer tents take center stage, it's important to remember that Oktoberfest is a full-blown Bavarian cultural experience with so much more to offer than beer and brats. After a 2-year pandemic hiatus, Oktoberfest is happening now and will run through Monday, October 3rd. Next up is my wellness spread, as well as my Skillshare tracker or note taker area and my TED Talk tracker, which are exactly the same as they were set up in my September setup, so we're going to go through this pretty quickly. I'm going to start by getting all of the line work down on the page first, and then I'll come in and color the headers. For my trackers, I'm going to be tracking movement, stretching, journaling, and no soda, which I am failing at miserably over the last few months. In the big bottom section, I track blood pressure, mood, steps, and then my sleep. And I have a dotted line at 10 p.m. and a dotted line at 6 a.m. as that is technically my ideal sleep pattern, although I never really stick to it. Next to wellness, I sketched out a sausage because what's better for you than a sausage? And then I used a dot marker to go ahead and pre-fill the month days, and then I'll just fill those in with an X when I'm ready to populate them. And then at the bottom of the page here, I just put in a trumpet, a pretzel, and another stein of beer. A few more lines and some color, and this page where I take notes on the Skillshare class every month as well as 4 TED Talks is complete. Turning to my first weekly, which for me is going to be week 41, I've already pre-populated some of the information on this page, like the header and some of the straight lines. We're going to pop in some of the color on the headers, and then I'm just going to go ahead and get started on this art piece down here in the corner. For each of the weeklies, I decided I wanted to draw some facsimile representation of some of Munich's largest beer tents for the Oktoberfest festival. I did want to do this with simply as possible, with some simple shapes and not an exact replica, and I'll pop a picture of this particular beer tent up here in just a little bit, but I'm going to use some stencils for ovals and circles and even some squares and rectangles, and then just as much line work as I can to get a good representation of the beer tent without copying it exactly, because I didn't want to go into that much detail for this setup. For this first week of October, I chose the Augustiner Brewery, which is the only Munich brewery that still delivers the beer in wooden barrels to Oktoberfest. This tent has 6,000 indoor and more than 2,500 outdoor seats, so it can fit a lot of people. What I have done very differently in this setup is while I still have a rolling task list on the right, I have not given myself designated spaces for the dailies. I want to be able to take as much space on Monday as I need, as much space on Tuesday as I need to fill in those spots for the dailies, and so I have not separated those out with their own headers. I've just left myself 2.5 columns there where I have room to fill in those daily notes. We are going to skip over the other weeklies for this setup. I have them sketched out, but I want to make sure that leaving all of the space for the dailies plan works for me, and move on to my playlist, my Sandbox, and a review page. Now the Sandbox is just my name for a brain dump. I just don't like the phrase brain dump, and so this is kind of what I've come up with. I've used it before, and it's just going to be an empty box that I can drop anything and everything into depending on my mood. For the playlist, I'm not going to do anything special, just use a dot marker to indicate where I can write in specific songs. And then I do have a little bit of artwork on this page. On the left, I do have another beer stein, and on the right, I've gone ahead and gotten in an outfit for a beer winch. Didn't want to be too terribly sexist in this setup, but I do think that those are kind of cute. They're definitely traditional, and so I decided to put one here on the review page. What I am going to do differently is create my own line ruled paper underneath each section of this review page. This is something that I did in my son's journal for September, and I really sort of like the look of it. Even though I don't necessarily want a line rule everywhere that I'm working on, I do decide to go ahead and put it in here. It takes a little bit of work, but I used a very light Tombow marker. I'll list the number in the description box below. so that you can see which marker I used to create that line rule. Now again, I did leave the Sandbox open because that's a place for free flow thoughts. I might want to do a mind map there, that sort of a thing. And then the playlist just has the dots, and that will wrap up the review, Sandbox, and playlist page for October. Turning back quickly for a flip through, and you can see that I have corrected Oktoberfest by adding that F back in. I hope that you have picked up some ideas for your bullet journal today. Please remember that all supplies will be listed in the description box below. And if you haven't learned anything about bullet journaling, I hope you learned a little something about Oktoberfest. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. It really does help my channel out a lot, and hit that bell notification so that you know the next time that I upload. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with me today. From whenever and wherever you're watching, remember that you too are fierce, and I will catch you in the next one.